All right, truth. I bang on about truth all the time. So what truth do we find in discourse analysis? I mentioned Fairclough at the beginning. I quite like this little model that he came up with. He does something called critical discourse analysis, so he's obviously a criticalist. Really, some really interesting work that he did. The reason why I like this is because it kind of models the levels that you can go through in research. So when you're using discourse analysis as a method, there are different levels you can go through. So you can actually just look at the text. You can do a nice little research project looking at the text and nothing else. So the example of the movies and how many lines a female characters say versus how many lines male characters say, all they've done is looked at the text and then drawn it out to gender. That's it. So they haven't done much else. They haven't, you know, I mean, they are Disney movies, so there is that context. But, you know, they've literally counted words. So you can do straight out text analysis. What is this? What are the words in this text? Then what you can do, and what that's doing is just describing it and leaving it to other people to judge to a certain degree. So your research there is about looking about what you're interested in, counting it out, and then saying, we found this, not making any comment, which is kind of what the Disney thing is. Then what you can do is you can start to interpret the data that you're getting and putting it more into information. But then you've got to think about, this is the hermeneutic stuff. Why was this text written? How was it written? What's the authorial intent? You know, what's the actual meaning here? What's this trying to say to me? That active interpretation. From this, I can take away. I am gaining these insights by reading this text. So, and of course that active interpretation means you've got to be aware of your reading of it is going to be different from somebody else's reading of it.
And that affects the truth?
Of course it affects the truth. All right? I love Shakespeare. So when I read Shakespeare, I already love it. That's great. All right? Year 9s fucking hate Shakespeare. All right? They won't read a word of it. So you do Skinhead Hamlet with them and everything gets better. If you don't know what I'm talking about, you really need to see Skinhead Hamlet. Goes for 5 minutes, it's great. Then of course you can bring it up to the next level and say, well, what's the society of this text? When was this text done? Why was it done at that time? What was the society like at that time? What was the history here? All right, that cartoon that I showed you at the beginning, in 10 years' time, that is going to make 0 sense. It will make no sense at all. It is a real time contingent cartoon. All right, it's complete context. We'll have forgotten the servers in 10 years' time. There'll be more stuff going. Okay. I love American politics because it is better than any TV show you can watch, I swear to God. So, and research can be done at any of those levels. You do not have to do the whole societal framework to make it a meaningful research project, doing discourse analysis. You just don't. All right? My thesis is sitting at interpretation. All right? I'm not going to what was going on in society at that time. I find it personally interesting, but it doesn't have any influence on my research. So it's not in my research. So it's about choosing what level you do your discourse analysis at. Of course, I use the term discourse analysis, but it's, you know, text analysis, content analysis, discourse analysis. Remember how I keep saying researchers like to use all these words to confuse people and make it inaccessible because then it makes them look smart. All right? This is the kind of stuff I'm talking about. All right, so discourse analysis is a big umbrella I'm using for content analysis, thematic analysis, and discourse analysis. All right, so that's a nice model. I kind of like that model. It just tells me where I'm placing the research. All right, I love memes. maybe I just spend too much time on Reddit. I like this meme for a whole range of reasons. No, we don't have time. One of the... I know, I'm home for today, sorry. For those of you with tutorials today, it's going to be fun. The thing is, it assumes that the handing over of a newspaper is knowledge. That's the thing that gets me about this meme. It assumes that the very act of having a newspaper in your hand means you have knowledge. You don't. With a newspaper in your hand, you have data. A newspaper is data. When you read it and interpret it, you're turning it into information. But it's only when you put that information in the context of the other newspaper you read, the conversation you had with somebody, the blog you read, that you're starting to build knowledge. Because if we ever assume as researchers that the single document that you've been given is a leap to knowledge, then we're fooling ourselves. There's got to be, the document is data. You are information, that layer. And then putting it in others is the knowledge, yeah? So the problem with this, of course, is that as Luke said, the problem is that when we get that data and we look at it, the truth, I hope the next slide is the one I'm after. No. The truth is you. It's absolutely how you've interpreted it. So when you read a document in discourse analysis and you decide that the most important thing in that is the white rose on page 3, that's your interpretation. It's your truth. So one of the biggest problems with content analysis and discourse analysis, and one of the biggest flaws with it, is how variable the truth is in it. Because the truth is whatever you've read it to be, or where you've seen it to be. So this is another reason in my research I'm using public documents. Because what that means is that anyone can go and look at exactly the same document that I did to see if what I saw is what was there. It's a way of keeping me honest. All right? I did some research on interviews. I wrote a paper on it, it got published. I put quotes in that from the interviews. But does that, actually it hasn't got published yet, it's going to get published. But I chose what to put in. No one reads those transcripts, they're completely private. So how do we know what I chose was the right thing to choose? Well, because I was going for a certain truth. So that was the truth I wrote about. I substantiated it, I explained it, I showed it. The truth was there, because it was there, but were there other truths there that might have been a different story? Yes. Should I have written that story? I don't know. It wasn't my research question. All right? So the truth in discourse analysis is the truth that you are looking for. It's the truth that you find. All right? So, I mean, it's the same with most research methods, but it's particularly true when you're looking at words or images, because we all interpret things so differently because of our own biases, right? We come back to the essay question. Our own way of viewing the world will change how we read